live discussion with my guest, and I'm so excited to introduce Jeffrey Newton. So we're going to dig into a lot of things today, and I just want to get right to it, but also just say thank you for joining me, Jeffrey.
Yeah, absolutely, Damien. I'm excited to be back. It's amazing how quickly 2 weeks disappears.
It is, yeah. Lots of progress in the past 2 weeks. Lots of things have changed, and just distilling that down so that you don't miss any part of it that you want to know about has been its own challenge. Like even though I'm living it, it's one of
Yeah,
those things you got to think through.
right. Yeah, I can only imagine the amount of learning and growing and thinking and evolving and almost just like lack of complacency is probably not the right word, but what you've been experiencing for these last 2 weeks based upon really where we left off even of, an incredibly full candidate pipeline for a brand new type of position, a brand new role in your organization, a new type of position in the world, really, in that you're seeking that AI ops individual, and where we sort of left it was a bunch of people, right? I think it was like 100 candidates within the first 48, 72 hours, something like that,
Yeah.
whittled down to 15. So maybe before we kind of dive into maybe a lot of the things that you've taken out of these last 2 weeks, talk us through revisiting that pipeline again, because I know that was something that several people took away as interesting and unique when we talked about the parallels between how you should treat hiring and job descriptions and a sales funnel, right? A people funnel.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to unpack there, right? First, if it feels like a lot, I've spent a decade failing through trying to create a process that is very different than the normal hiring process. And it's because I want to attract what I would call unconventional people. And normal job descriptions generally drive them away. And then right now, I think this is the best time. I've always thought it was an amazing time to attract those people that others overlook. And it's specifically a job description that can actually attract neurodivergent people. And so for just a quick context, that's at least 20%, in a lot of cases more, of the workforce. And so, just from a pure numbers perspective, you're missing out on at least a fifth of the workforce, usually more in kind of a tech field. And my thoughts are, with AI, things are changing more than ever. And so one of the fundamental changes, I made the original mistake, and I said, I'm going to copy a job description, update our company details, and post it. But I had none of our culture, none of those things. And I started rethinking that whole hiring process as its own funnel. And I said I should put at least as much effort into this funnel as I do the sales funnel, because if I really believe culture is the most important thing, then from a first principles perspective, hiring is incredibly important. So that led me to rethink all the way, starting with like the job description, because if I start on the wrong foot there, I never even get the right people into the funnel at all.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting too with the right people, right? I think we spent a little bit of time talking through that before, so we don't have to rehash all of that. But the core of it was ultimately including language that allowed the right people to self-identify with, that sounds like it's for me, right? It allows the words to come off the paper and really pull them into something that they desire to be a part of. Now, this was something I learned on my journey as a employee. Was it took me a long time, maybe like 15 of the 18 years in MSP world, to realize that when I was facing a change or feeling like I wanted to make one, it took me that long to realize that it was more important to understand that I needed to be running towards something than I needed to be running away from something in the role specifically, right? Because I chased a lot of things, uh, status, identity, progression, hierarchy, power, but I don't know that it was power. Like all the things you think that you're really supposed to chase because it's kind of the way that the world at least articulates what you need to be looking for. And through all of those changes, right? I worked at 5 different MSPs, 7 different times, in 11 different roles over 18 years. So change. But it took 15 years to realize that what I needed and what I should have been chasing the entire time was fulfillment. And that's how I bring it back to that piece about finding the right people. It's like when you can call out the right people for the right reasons, using the right words on paper, they can self-identify as that's for them, which then sort of closes the loop to fulfillment. And now you've plugged in someone who's willing and wanting to contribute and is fulfilled by it. And then you get the recipe for discretionary effort, at least in my experience. And so to tie that back to what you had mentioned really about like the neurodivergence too, and finding the right people, at least for you at Servosity, did you run into a scenario, whether internally or externally, when you were thinking about creating this new role, where you had to kind of fight any of the dogmas of like what it normally looks like to go hire for any role from any of the stakeholders inside the company?
Not for this role, because they were like, this is your vision. This is your crazy thing you want to do. And the other thing I want to share is, even though we're a technology company, even though we're not an MSP and we have software developers and things like that, what I realized earlier this year is we weren't born AI native, and we're going through our own AI native transformation. And that is different for each individual on the team. And some are more for it and some are more against it. And so we have folks that are in all different, kind of spots on that. If I think about it like the 5 stages of grief, I think some of them have moved into acceptance and others have not. And so I think they were like, this is your vision, and I'm not sure I actually see it yet. So this wasn't, I'm the founder and CEO, so we're going to do whatever I say kind of moment. This is this vision. I'm going to share it with you. And, they said, well, that sounds good, but I don't follow it closely enough to understand the details. I don't know. They couldn't really contribute on the probability of, let's say, finding this person, or what will this really enable us to do? And I think we're really kind of in the middle of a lot of people saying, well, I can get it to rewrite my emails. Like I can do a lot of very basic things, but like, can it really drive ROI, especially enough to make a full-time hire? And so not as much resistance or dogma. And I think part of it, the other part of that though, Jeffrey, is for years. So originally I started off doing all the wrong things, copying, pasting the job descriptions, nothing that differentiated us. And it took me a long time to distill the values, the mission, the culture into a piece of paper. And it's hard. And you got tickets to deal with, and you got customers on board. You got things to do. So it's not like like, well, let's spend a week thinking about this, right? If that's you, well, please let me know. But that wasn't me. And so I was like, how do I even justify spending that time? And is it worth it? And I questioned that in the early days. And what I can say definitively now with evidence is it absolutely is, because we went over years, and it wasn't a binary flip where as soon as I decided the first version, the next job description was amazing. In fact, it's been years. And in fact, to that, we think of this like a funnel, and we think of it like a sales funnel, the hiring funnel, but we also think of it like marketing. Like, why would you only post one job description? Every marketer does A/B testing, does some iterations, test the headline, test the copy, test for conversion. And if you think about it, the headline, the copy, the conversion is, do the right people apply? Not just, that's the other mistake, not do just people apply, but the right people. Yeah. And so we've really gotten into the habit where it's more typical to post 2 or 3. And we're not trying to mislead people. If we're hiring for one role, we'll post it 2 or 3 times, but just different. Sometimes we'll test the body, but more often it's the title. And we will see incredibly different results, not only in volume, but in who we're attracting. And we don't always get it right still. but
Mhm.
we always experiment and we dial it in from there. And just a small, like one word difference in the job description has led to the right candidates versus just a ton of the wrong
Yeah.
candidates. And just as a human, when I post it and then I get a whole flood and we start looking through and most of them are just the wrong candidates. I don't mean
Mhm.
maybe they don't have experience, but you start talking to them and they're not the right fit.
Yeah.
I start to have bias. I start to go, there's nobody good out there. I can't find the right person. The
Mhm.
market's saturated. You know, the good people are taken. You know, I start to tell
Yeah.
myself all these false narratives and kind of bias the decision. So to protect against that bias and to experiment, the default is essentially A/B test
Mhm.
from the start.
Yeah. What has to be probably interesting, and maybe this is the good or the bad in what you were experiencing, but I look to compare it again to like the sales funnel methodology, or really the opportunity funnel. Um, I would look at that and think, depending on how many inbounds or submissions you were getting for the role, it's a lot easier to walk out into the middle of the opportunity river and place your bucket down and scoop it up versus like try to will the banks of the river to bend over to where you're trying to articulate it. So something as simple as an A/B test, where it's, and this role is a good example probably, where like AI ops is not a common household name of role or job description
No,
currently.
not at all.
Uh, and so, this is a bit more of an example of like, you're standing on the bank trying to will the current, right? To carve out where those people will come, rather than just walking out into the middle of it and saying, maybe you want an executive assistant with some AI experience, or you want a automation expert, or some other terminology label name that's been in the market for
But
years at this
but
point.
I did that. I
Right.
did exactly that, right? I had an EA
Mm-hmm.
who moved on, and I posted a full-time EA job, and I knew I wanted to do a lot more with AI. And I fell into the trap that I often fall into, which is I want an EA, but I want them. I didn't think they would be quite as in depth as I'm looking at this role, but I still was like, I want kind of AI native this and great with this and savvy in this and all these things. And I even posted the job, and we weren't getting many applicants, but I started thinking about it. I was like, just described a unicorn. Like I'm sure there's one
Yeah.
out there, but I don't know if there's many. And
Mm-hmm.
more importantly, I kind of thought through this more and I said, look, the job that my EA had, the last EA that hired years ago has changed. What I need from them has changed. And it's no longer a full-time job. It's less hours. And obviously the world has changed with AI and what we can do and how it can help save time. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
so why don't I lean into that, carve out some of that same budget, have a part-time EA, full-time AI hire. And that was part of the budget, but also part of the thought process to say, let me do that. And I also realized short term, if I'm being direct, it would have been easier just to hire an EA and be
Mm-hmm.
done with it, right? We probably wouldn't be having this discussion right now
Yeah.
about that. I probably would be, making a final offer right now instead of going through interviews. But I
Right.
realized if I think longer term, this
Mm-hmm.
AI role now will make a dramatic impact. I think in terms of growth for the company, but also equally important is growth for everyone here. And
Yeah.
since we're not what I would call fully AI native, I think they're going to see what's happening and what's getting built, and you're going to be curious. You're going to jump in. You're going to start tinkering. You're going to start building. And so I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's at least as important. So I made that very mistake, right? I posted that and then took it down and decided to reframe this. And since I didn't make anybody an offer, nothing was final, right? I
Yeah.
realized it pretty quickly, but I still made that mistake even after all of these years. And then just so this doesn't sound like easy or that I've got it all figured out, incredibly hard job to hire for. What I mean by that is if you're looking for an L1, we kind of all know what an L1 is.
Mm-hmm.
And certain roles are less defined. And certain times, like for example, if you're looking in a lead generation capacity, you might try sales development rep versus business development rep, but we know what those things are. But this
Yeah.
was one where I knew enough to know that if I get this wrong, I'm going to get nobody, or I'm going to get $500,000 salaried
Mm.
folks that
Yeah.
have tons of machine learning expertise. And sure, they could probably help us, but not in our budget.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it was a whole series of leveraging AI and even deep research and challenging its assumptions and having it go across job boards. Because to me, the title, I've broken it down to this, the title, I need to align with whatever the most people are. So if I'm looking for the most amazing closer, like I don't call it the most amazing closer,
Mm-hmm.
I need to call it account executive because that's what
Yeah.
people are looking for, or something like that, senior account executive, whatever that is. I need to go and be boring, which is hard because I want to have something cool in the title only though. Then the description is where I get the opportunity to convey
Yeah.
why we're different and why you and only you should apply and why everybody else probably shouldn't. And
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of been the unlock for me.
Yeah. And it's interesting again to correlate it to a similar motion on like the sales and marketing side. If you think about it that way, is the initial objective of, let's call it a cold outbound email or just an email in general, is the subject line, right? And what's the point of the subject line? It's only to sell the click, which is to get the thing opened and read. That's kind of what I hear you describing in, you may have to choose something boring like account executive, but it's also what the audience is looking for or the intended recipient. And then when they click into the account executive role, that's where you can sort of get hooked with the hook or the sub headline or any of those things to open up the self-identification language that we talked about earlier, where it's like, oh, okay, this is different. It feels different. It sounds different. It also sounds for me, or it sounds me.
Mm-hmm.
And that then translates kind of maybe to the next phase of our conversation, is where you've been spending that time here for the last 2 weeks, right? So we know that opening the role and then the initial, let's call it qualification process, we went from roughly 100 applicants to roughly 15 in the pipeline, we'll call it. Where or how have those numbers shifted since the last time we talked? And then we'll kind of talk through what we've done with those folks in the meantime as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. And going back to like the job description, if I didn't get the title right, this wouldn't happen. What I mean by that is I needed a title that has AI, since we want you to do AI things, but I couldn't get too grandiose or I'm going to attract the wrong people. So again, a good bit of experimentation there. And then we started getting not only a lot of applicants, but a lot of the right ones. And so generally we will post on free job boards and get a minimum of 100 applicants. That's been our trajectory or experience for technical roles, for sales roles, for account executives, administrative assistants, even office management, across a lot of different areas of the business. So a lot of people, I think, oh, it's not possible. And I think this is part of it. And part of the job description, which you can see, and it's out there, it's still live, is we intentionally are not looking for a 4-year degree. We are not looking for X years experience in this particular thing. And so, yes, this is an entry-level role, and some maybe I want a little more experience. But even when we hire more senior people, we're always looking for kind of that right person. And it's a blessing and a challenge. They come packaged in my experience. And what I mean by that is we did get the right title. And with this job description, we've had people literally, I had one yesterday that said, wow, you're the first to give me a shot. Everybody else says, I can't even speak to them unless you have X years experience. And if you think about it, in Gen AI, we're 2 years or less really into modern Gen AI.
Yeah.
So what am I going to ask for? A year, maybe 2, if I'm really being greedy. And so we have some people that are applying that have experience. We have at least as many that don't have any. And this goes to another core belief, which is the resume, in my experience, is about the most useless tool to gauge a human and their capacity. And so that means we don't get the easy gate of, you don't have
Yeah.
experience in industry, toss out this one. That means we had to design a new process and invent new ways to assess people and to understand their capacities and capabilities. And so that has been, years and years of working through that. So hundreds, and we still get applicants every single day, hundreds and hundreds of applicants. We had gotten it down to about 15, but to give you kind of an update, I have another 12 or 15 interviews this week. And so what we're going to do is we know we have both quality and quantity at this point. So we're going to make a decision in terms of who we invite to the next level by the end of this week. And then we have a whole set of processes to kind of gauge the next ones. But just to say it directly, that meant that I chose to put a few gates up. They had to apply, they had to reply and tell us some things that they're passionate about. We're looking for, can you write a coherent sentence? Do you have, or nowadays, can you use AI to write a coherent sentence, right? Some version of that. And we have an assessment they take. The funny thing about those is sometimes half the people drop out from the application, just asking them for basics. Almost another half drop out when we ask them to spend 15 minutes answering some questions for us. And so those are great filters. Even so, we have gotten a really high demand. So I'll probably be somewhere in the 30 interviews. So that means I'll have spent, 30 minutes times 30 interviews with these folks. And I want to show up in the beginning of this to start to see what they look like. I also wanted to do it selfishly because they're so diverse people. And I'm getting to ask them questions, not only what are they doing or how are they doing it, but how are they learning what they learn? Because nobody's really, everybody's self-taught. Nobody was really taught this. And so I get to learn a lot of everything from interesting tools or, channels to follow all the way to, techniques. So I will say I've done this over a decade, this very unconventional hiring process, but I've never seen the level of interest in diversity. And then people show up and say, wow, you're the only one. Like, I can't wait to show you what I can do, because nobody else is looking past the kind of core, do you have a 4-year degree or do you have this experience type of mantra. And so we're getting all kinds of people from all over the U.S.
Did you, aside from like the time of Gen AI being just so fresh, were there other lessons learned that you intentionally installed into that application specifically around the lack of certain requirements? Meaning, did you put in like doesn't require a 4-year degree and or a certain amount of years experience explicitly so that you would dispel an assumption, or were there other reasons underneath that?
Yeah, this is where like the first postings of jobs like this used to be like, no degree required. And then, a few years ago, before AI helped me write some of the things I was like, have a degree, we won't hold it against you. And part of it was just kind of leaning into who we are. And our entire team, I can't tell you who has a degree or who doesn't, because it doesn't really matter, right? It's what you get done. It's the quality of your thought and effort. And so it's not something that we require. And that really resonates with certain people. Now, if I were to guess, and this is really a guess, maybe half of my team has a degree, but I don't care. You know what I mean? I care about the quality and what they've done. And most of those, they didn't just get a degree and say, I'm ready, right? Most of them, if they had a degree, they were just really passionate in a certain area. They developed skills over time. You could tell when you talked to them, they knew more than a lot of other people. A quick example, I've got a team member interviewing with me, and he noticed something fascinating, which is it seems like everybody that we interview that has already got a job doing AI seems to be less passionate. And so he noticed that pattern after 6 or 8 of them, and it's so far seeming to hold true. And I'm not saying that they have no passion, but I'll ask about what are they learning, what are they leaning into, why, and they're like, well, what the job asked me to do was this, so I do that, and
Sure.
so it's very interesting. And obviously, AI is so many things to so many people. So you have a whole bunch of really passionate people that are leaning into
Yeah.
that. And even before we did this for AI, I mean, a decade ago, we were looking for techs, and the fact that you didn't have a degree or you didn't have any experience in the industry
Yeah.
didn't stop us. But back then, we were asking questions like, well, what do you do since you don't have work experience? Like, what do you do? What do you teach? Oh, I built a home lab. What do you run that in?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm running that on VMware. Oh, okay, great. What are you doing with it? And you could have the people, they Googled VMware or Hyper-V or whatever, and they could tell you that, but you'd ask a layer or
Right.
two deeper, and they're like, I don't know, and then you have
Yeah.
people that are like, well, I can configure the vSwitch to have, connect to my VLAN, and then I did this, and they get into it, and you're like,
Yeah.
okay,
Right. You've
there's
actually
some
touched
depth
this.
there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to me is those people, especially when you're not hiring for sales roles, they're not the most confident. They're not the most well-spoken. They're not like, I've also have to realize I don't want to introduce bias in terms of the most outspoken, most confident person should get the job, because especially for technology or AI or other roles, like some of my best folks, it's hard to get words out of them, right? They're super introverted, but when you talk to them about something they're passionate about, like they just light up.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so now you're thinking, like, how can you further orient the hiring process? Maybe not to cater towards it, but to at least offer the avenue or the modality of that level of demonstrating capability too, right? One of the things we talked about on the last one was of those different gates that you've introduced to the process, some for friction and some for qualification. One of the experiments you were dabbling with the idea of was, do we give the candidates an opportunity to show us instead of tell us either what they would do or how they'd solve a problem or what they're capable of? Maybe walk us through if you've made any decisions there yet, and if so, maybe what those decisions are and what we can expect for that candidate's journey in that regard.
Yeah. So for anybody that doesn't give your final candidates a project, I think you're missing out. And it took me a long time to kind of come to that, a lot longer than it should have, to come to that conclusion. And I don't, for any role, I've always done it. So I don't care if it's an executive assistant, sales role. Like for sales role, I had somebody go find, one of their tests was like, okay, go find 50 prospects, because they weren't in the MSP industry. And half the time it takes them too long to figure out what managed services even means. So I was like, go find 50 MSPs that you think are good prospects. And, that versus others who showed up with, you had people that did the 50, you had people that did more, you had people that the quality wasn't good. Executive assistants, as I'm interviewing for MSP Mindset, I said, find people that you think would make excellent guests. So very open-ended, but you could see the effort or the quality of the output. And, we've done similar things with the technical hires. We generally do the project or assign a project right before we have the final interview. So usually we're down to somewhere around 3 or 4 people at that stage. And they're all, as far as we can tell, really, really good. And we want to see, because I've had people that interview really, really well, and they don't execute well. And so we want to see, how do they think and how they execute. So this particular project is very interesting because we have very diverse viewpoints. We have very diverse skill sets, at least in a lot of technology. I'd be like, oh, well, you're a little deeper in networking than you are in, hypervisors or whatever. It's really all over the board. And so, love anybody's thoughts or questions around this, but currently my thinking is, we're just going to say, here's some of the things we want to build. Here's some opportunities to save us time and effort. And, you pick what lights you up, what does this. My thoughts are, though, a couple. One, I'm trying to give you something that you could do in a weekend. That's the other thing is we don't give you a week. We generally will announce it and say you have 72 hours and, turn it in by then. And the reason is in our world, at least, we have a deadline, and not necessarily by a client or whatever, but whatever time we thought we had, we didn't. And we got to produce something. And so it's never been more true in this day and age. In fact, even some of these interviews, I could tell people had gotten this far in the interview by using AI. And then if I asked them a question or two in real time, they just didn't know. And so you have some of that, but give me a month. I could probably sound like I know how to build a rocket. I know nothing about rocket science, but given AI in a month, I could probably come up with something that sounded pretty good, but given a weekend or something like that, I would crumble in the ability to not only talk about it, but to produce something. So I try to think in terms of what's longer than, let's say, an hour, but what's, I don't want to give them a week or two of work and expect it in a weekend. Because I also don't want to set the tone of like, oh, I'm going to give you this. And let's say you're working somewhere else and you have the weekend off. I don't want to give you every waking hour as a project.
Right.
That's not what I'd want for you when you work here. It's not what I want for you to apply. So we do want a tight deadline that tests your ability to ship and execute, but we don't, want to overdo that. And then a mentor of mine said, look, we've never advertised that we do this, but we always give a gift card as just a token of appreciation. I always tell them, like, your time and you're far more valuable than this, but like whether we hire you or not, everybody that completes the project, we give them something. And they don't know that going in. They're just willing to do it and excited to move to the next level. But I found that is the best way I know, a small token to show people that, like, we're not here to, like, the goal isn't to get 10 people to produce this prospect list. So now we have even more prospects or whatever it is. Like, this is not a way to get free labor in some capacity as much as it is just to think about that. So the last filter, and I love your thoughts, Jeffrey, and anybody else that wants to drop a comment, is besides it being time bound and reasonable in terms of the time, is we're trying to make sure they could demonstrate something that's not just a theoretical. We want to actually use it. So for example, in the job description, it said day one, we're going to get an email that you've built, or not an email, we're going to get a Slack notification when there's a billing error. That's a day one activity. That would be easy, fairly small project. But I'm not going to give anybody access to our payment processor or internal Slack. So we're trying to figure out what can we give you or what's already out there so that you could build an actual, real working one, even if we have to give you some simulated data. But the more real it is, the more we can evaluate it. And the more real it is, the harder it'll be, because reality's never neat. The data is never quite perfect. So yeah, that's the thoughts. And I love your thoughts on that, because I think this could be one of the most important ones. I think a project is always important, but given that, for example, we have people that show up. We had a person interviewed who has spent 18 or 24 months in prompting. And we have one that did a lot of prompting for, like, red teaming. We had another one that did a lot of prompting for developing very durable personas, because they were building something that would interact with kids, and they had to make sure it was going to always stick to this personality and never deviate and do something it shouldn't. And so they just had a lot of not only testing, but, like, in that case, a lot of prompting. So in some cases it's like, I might get somebody that's just really in depth, almost prompt engineer. In the other case, I get folks that are like automation wizards in N8N or Make or Zapier or what have you. And others, you just got people that are using the models or doing some vibe coding or just all kinds of things. So I know that we'll get very different outputs because their experiences are so vastly different.
Yeah. So the output reveals so much more ultimately through the project, right? And one of the main thing I was thinking when you were describing the process and the thought process going into what you're doing, like in your process here, is ultimately the creating the opportunity to expose the level of thinking from the individual about the task, which I know we've had some offline and online conversations about, is like one of the most critical or fundamental or paramount, like I don't know what the right word is, but one of the most beneficial effects of AI is actually the ability to level up your thinking, right? Or to use it to hone or
Mm-hmm.
sharpen or strengthen or look at from a different perspective that you maybe didn't previously possess the idea, the concept, the reality, the thing, so that the level of depth in your thinking then creates that much higher of a level of output in the deliverable. And so I will be fascinated to unpack, what did you see after you start seeing some of those come back, right? Did you gain, was that evident? Like, was that assumption correct? And then two, just almost to your point earlier, being exposed to the thinking of so many different folks, I think would be really fascinating too for this kind of a role. That kind of takes me to my last point on this, and in my own experience, is that individuals who are atypical, or I mean, let's just go back to the neurodivergent. It doesn't have to be that, but unconventional thinking tends to be, or is surfacing as, a pretty strategic ingredient for how to operate in this world where so many things are now more accessible, because it's almost as though with AI, any situation can be the blank canvas, and they're literally creators, right? Like the solution, the way that they've thought about solving the problem, how they put it together with the tools or no tools or code or no code or any of those components, is actually where the magic starts to unfold in my experience. And so I think it's really interesting and fascinating to follow the more you've peeled back the layers of typical from your process. It would only make sense to me that your end result or the outcomes or the people that go through it will just be like asymmetric upsides
Mm-hmm.
of where today's reality is. Back to your earlier point about, Servosity didn't start because it's been around for so long, AI first.
Yeah.
And so in a world where today things, people, businesses, ideas can be AI first or AI native, as you were calling it, so far, one of the ingredients I've found to be really powerful is that atypical thinking in an AI native reality with the tools that are available to manifest and materialize the idea. So it'd be interesting to see what people come up with for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's not lost on me that some people see this as it's a big investment of time. Some people see this as a negative, that I've chosen to interview over 30 of these applicants. They had to make it through multiple gates to get there. But I've chosen that they were already that good. But it's also a blessing because I've gotten to talk to 30 people building in the wild with very different perspectives, and to hear why they think this or why they're doing this. Like, there's part of me that wants to not have an interview and just, have a philosophical debate on why are you doing this and how do you do this? And like, you get everything from like, I love the latest state of the art models to I only like the closed models, and I like to train my own models, down to, the automators, to the prompt engineers, to the, there was a gentleman I interviewed this week that he almost didn't mention it. And I said, well, what are you doing just for fun? Like, what's really got your excitement right now? Because he was telling me things related to what we're doing. And he said, well, familiar with the Jarvis from the movie? And I was like, yeah. He's like, I've got kind of a version of that running on my computer. He's like, I just speak to it, and it, replies to emails, does my calendar, opens up Word documents and handles those. So it's funny, like, he almost didn't mention. By the way, I've built like spoiler alert, I don't think it actually flies around or launches any missiles yet, but
Right.
like, still, that's quite impressive to be doing. But you can tell he's he couldn't not do it. It's his passion project, right? And so that's what's interesting. And I think there's so many people that are sitting there going, ooh, pick me, pick me. Like, I don't feel seen in all the other ways and all the other roles. And if you pick me, I will not only feel seen, but I will show up in a way that I've never showed up before. And they're sitting there going, I'm doing this for fun, to do it during the day, to not just do it on the nights or weekends is like, a dream. And so it's also not lost on me that every once in a while I get to be a very, very small part of changing somebody's trajectory and be a blessing. It's all them, it's all their talent, but just to give that initial opportunity. And so, it goes back to my philosophy, which is I'm betting on your trajectory. And so we don't screen you out if you're neurotypical or if you're not neurodivergent. Like we don't filter you out. We let everybody have that opportunity. But I would say we see people kind of self-identifying in the way that we write the jobs as being more atypical, being slightly more outliers. And given the pace of innovation, the pace of change, I'm always willing to bet on our ability to not require experience and move quickly with these job descriptions to attract these outlier, atypical, however you want to kind of put this in a box, people, because you can do so many things. And we haven't scratched the surface. Most people have admitted if they quit developing any more models, we've got years of work just to even start to develop some of the potential that's already released. And of course, they're not going to quit developing models. And so there's the people that are just like, what value can I get out of this? There are people that are like, and there's some that have been obsessed over, interestingly enough, value creation. Like they're like, I like it and I'm interested in the tech, but like, I want to really create value somewhere because I've been building stuff that, maybe it handles my own needs, but they are like, I really want to show up somewhere where I can make a difference. And, we're blessed to have, in our case, hundreds of MSPs as clients that you can impact them and their clients. And so, you kind of have the second and third order magnitude consequence. So, I've never seen, it feels like a better fit. And I don't mean this in an arrogant way, but there must be something in the job description because people are showing up and they're more passionate than ever, not just about AI as a technology, but they're like, you're allowing me to show up in this way. You're allowing me to show who
tangible
I am.
impact, right?
Yeah. And it was in our job description, which is, we're not, AI, help me say it better, but we're betting on your trajectory. We're betting on where you're going, not where you've been. And, a few of them have like quoted that in the interview, right? Not in a brown nosing kind of way, but just in like, this is it. It's like they just, they completely agree with the philosophy.
Yeah. What's fascinating about that too, if you think about it through the lens of AI and technology and how you're describing it, is you've really tapped into one of those innate human desires, not only to be heard and seen and understood, but to have an impact on something greater than ourselves. Traditionally, that's a keen motivator for humans. And that has never been more, not necessarily binary, but like real and actionable and tangible. And the feedback loop has never been shorter, maybe is the best way of saying that, right? Where you can
that is a great point.
Think of something and create it and see the impact of it all in a matter of a couple keystrokes or a couple of words spoken to the system, because AI has shifted much of the doing to just simply straight to the outcome, right? In fact, if you can talk to AI through a lens of outcomes, you're going to get there a lot faster anyway, because of the way that it works. So that's a little bit of a nugget for people to take away, rather than trying to force it through your thinking and your process and your iterations. Just give it the outcome you want and see how it would tell you to go about it, and then assess from there. But the creation side, I think we've just never had a shorter feedback loop to have as large of an impact. I was in a different conversation this last week where I've often now for maybe 6 months or so been talking through this lens of like time continues to just keep collapsing on itself, time and capability.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's as if the time collapsing on itself is really inside this just massive cavitation. And just like that's how it's happening inside this cavitation. Go Google image that if you don't know what it is, and just like think of that in this way. Like the models are out there leading, everyone's tinkering and building or doing some other things, small and big, but like all of it's happening just right up behind these models. But the models aren't stopping either. Right, a bullet underwater. All of that's happening. Just all that inertia, all that mass, right inside that point of cavitation, and that's like the momentum that you're going to see, I think, coming out of people like this building these things for you and your business, especially when the business wasn't AI native to begin with, and you start adding in some of these compounding exponents to things that you need to get done anyway.
Yeah. We put right in the job description, and it's really resonated. Most of the people have said the fact that you have the first 90 days laid out in the job description, they're like, that just spoke to me. You've defined what winning or success looks like, and so few jobs do that. And I think that's another innate need. Like we want to know that we're valuable, we're succeeding, and it's hard when it's not well defined. But what's different this time for us is we have a day one, ship this day one, and that just wasn't. We've done software development for a long time, but there's you could fix a grammatical error in the docs or something, day one, but like it's hard to do this without the leverage that AI creates.
Yeah.
And, by day 90, it's like triaging 100% of the tickets for the entire team and, creating all these other efficiencies. And hopefully, anybody listening, especially MSPs, could identify with what kind of impact that will make. And a lot of them have said, what does this role look like? And what I've told them is like the first 90 days we've outlined as mostly internal facing, so that what will happen is you'll do this for billing, you'll do this for support, you'll do this over here to automate this area, and you'll get exposed to different parts of the business. But what's going to happen is they're going to watch your feet. They're going to see what you're doing, and they're going to say, oh, I want more. And so we're going to go from a few things to, I think, everybody raising their hand saying, can I have this? Can I have that?
Yeah.
Because their eyes will be opened as we are moving to AI native. So it's funny, I'm hiring kind of an entry-level person that is going to do a technology role that inadvertently is going to teach us how to transform to AI native, whether they realize it or not. And I've said that's probably the more powerful transformation as a company, to think AI first and become AI native. I remember when everybody used the term digital immigrant, right? If you were born at a certain time, you weren't you weren't native, you were an immigrant.
Yeah.
And,
You're either before or after you've got mail, essentially. Right?
Exactly. So if you're listening right now, you're an AI immigrant. You're not, you weren't born with AI being a thing. So I keep that mindset in and know that we have to make that transformation. But they're just excited by that to have real value internally. But I also say, look, we're building it into our product. But that's going to give you time to work with our software development team, and not only you to get to know us and our clients, but in the MSP industry, but my team will evolve. Their thinking will evolve. And before we go and ship something, client facing, you'll have all these other immediate first 90-day ways to create value. And it's exciting for me because we've always tried to have clarity of like, this means you're on track or this means you're ahead or behind, which is easier said than done. But the pace at which this can be done and the value that can be created in 90 days is just so much larger. And I don't know, I'd love other thoughts, but I feel like I run into equal number of people that think AI doesn't really do anything. You can just paste some stuff and have it reformat your document. That's where it is. And then I probably run into almost as many people that are like, it's already controlling the world and does everything, and you're like, both are inaccurate right now. And so figuring out, where are we on that and how can we apply that has been amazing. And to get to talk to 30 different builders in the past couple of weeks and see everybody's perspective and their own lens for viewing it has been
Yeah.
incredibly fascinating.
Yeah. The thing that I know to be true, because it's the same again from sales, it's in a lot of areas, but it's certainly true in sales, is that the lesson that I took from that, which I hear you saying in how this role will impact your team, is that value is only understood after it's been experienced. And we're in such an interesting time and place right now where not every business, not every individual has experienced the impact, either positive or negative, that AI can have on their reality, on their job, on their role, or their function, or any aspect of their life. And so you don't know what to expect because you haven't experienced it yet.
Yeah.
And it's great that if you really think about it and you've defined the first 90 days, you've essentially built in, I usually call it the 4-minute mile, right? Like you have to do the impossible first, which is how people believe that it's possible. Is like Roger Bannister was the first person to break a 4-minute mile in the world, at least documented. And before that, no one had done it, right? Because it hadn't been documented. But after that, there were 2, and then there were 6, and then there were 11, and now there's probably hundreds, or thousands. But the whole point is like someone had to do it first. And that was the thing that sparks belief. And that's just another way of kind of talking through that value is only understood after it's been experienced situation or reality.
I love that. And it just reminded me that I've never interviewed for a role where people showed up not only so excited that they have an opportunity to be seen, but countless of them have said, look, you're ahead of the curve with this AI operations role. And they are like, there's not many out there, but they said in 6 months, maybe 12, everybody's going to need this. Everybody's going to be hiring for this. So I don't say that I know the future or any of those things. It's less about me. It's just that I've never been in a hiring situation where tons and tons, like it wasn't 1 or 2, like so many of them could see. And I think are also wanting to be some of the first to show the value, because it's interesting. We're not what I would call AI native. And so again, some of my team's a little further along than others, but they don't see the possibility in some of these things. And I'll talk about, well, we want you to build this, or how about this, or could you build this? And they're like, oh yeah, well, you do this and you do that and you mix this and you get this, like it's very, very doable, very, almost formulaic. And then they're like, absolutely, we can achieve that. But there's still people on my team where that sounds like science fiction.
Yeah. Right. Those moments are the most exciting to watch when people can no longer put the genie back in the bottle, right? Like the world does change because it's what is now possible was never possible before. And it's amazing to watch people's minds and creativity come to life when they see it and never go back. As we kind of close out the conversation today, maybe talk us through and the audience through, do you have any expectations between now and maybe 2 weeks from now when we pick back up in the conversation? Like what do you anticipate is going to happen? Maybe decisions that you need to navigate, or just simply, here's kind of the outcome of some things that are already in motion.
Yeah. So we had originally framed it as over 100 applied. That number has continued to I don't know if it's double that, but it's continued to grow. And we were down to about 15. We've gone through another gate. We're probably down to half of that. Now we're back up to what I think will probably be another 15 or something. And it's not a magical number. It's just what it happens to be. And we're going to go through a few different steps in our process before we speak next time. And one of the exciting ones is the project. So we're going to give them an opportunity to actually flex their creative muscles, build actual working products, and show us that they work, and demonstrate that they really work, and see how well they work. And that will all happen before we talk next. So on one hand, as I'm going through all these interviews, 2 weeks flies by, and I'm like, it's wow, we get to talk again.
Right.
On the other hand, I think it's going to feel like a whole different reality once we've seen the output of so many different people and what they were able to come up with. And I loved your, Roger Bannister 4-minute mile, because I think instead of saying I want everybody to build the same thing, which would be, easier to compare apples to apples.
Mhm.
We're just giving them some of our dreams and desires and goals, and maybe not multi-year ones that are too big, but like, here's some of the things we'd
Yeah.
love to see, and maybe we don't
Mhm.
think it's doable, and somebody does it, right? They run the 4-minute mile, they create the thing, and you're like,
Yeah.
what? How did you
Mm.
do that? So why
Yeah.
would I constrain the people
Mhm.
that are pushing the limits and building things that I couldn't even imagine, by
Mhm.
saying build the same thing? So we're going to give some guidance, kind of pick your own adventure of things we would love for
Yeah.
you to build that are applicable to what we do. But I think I'm most excited to see what people do with that. There's always an element of
Mhm.
how they interpret what we're describing, either good
Yeah.
or in a slightly, they don't ask enough questions. Maybe they don't interpret it incredibly well. But then you add all
Mhm.
of the, I bet this could happen. I bet this would do this. I bet if I added this
Mm.
thought or
Yeah.
capability to it.
Hmm. What's fascinating about that, kind of two thoughts on it. One, you're essentially giving people outcomes and allowing them the creativity to go between A and Z. There's another secret to success in that. One is you eliminate the like false start fear too, by saying we didn't ask you to go through steps 1 through 33 to test whether or not you did them or not. We wanted
Mm-hmm.
this outcome, and so you could just get started. And what's so fascinating about that is once you're in motion, once you've begun, as long as you don't choose to stop going, like you'll figure it out most of the time. It may not
Mm-hmm.
look the same way, but you will figure it out. I think that's an outside observation of kind of the process you've set up is by orienting towards the outcome, which is AI native as well. It's innate for humans, which is interesting, but also what will you uncover or discover through the lens of, because there wasn't writer's block or fear of failure necessarily, like just getting started, then having the conversation with them of the iterative thinking. Like, what did you encounter? How did you overcome it? And just seeing that come materialize, I think will be fascinating as well.
Yeah, you can see the passion in their eyes, because I'm like, look, this is what this looks like, and you're the first pure AI hire, but you're not the last.
Hmm.
And they have this opportunity to create this mark, and so the right people are self-selecting, and they're just incredibly driven. So much so, we laid out the first 30, 60, 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are, the day one, a few of them have already done that. That didn't surprise me too much. They've already done
Sure.
it, turned it in, and demoed that they could build it, and built
Yeah.
it in their own. And then, which is great. Not everybody did it, but I was like not entirely surprised. But some are building the day 60 or even the day
Mm-hmm.
90. And they're like,
Yeah.
I'm going to knock that out by the time
Mm-hmm.
our interview is next week. And you're like,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's very much that 4-minute mile. Like, why would I put those limitations on you when you have an entirely different perspective, point
Mm-hmm.
of view, experiences, all these things that you bring as a human that they exist nowhere
Yeah.
else.
That's awesome. I can't wait for the next time we talk so that we can talk about all of those genies that are out of the bottle that are never going back in, with what you discover going through that with so many people.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we can bring some examples next time. Let's see what
Yeah,
this looks like.
absolutely. Make it more tangible for people.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this time, Jeffrey, and thank you for everybody that has joined us. And I appreciate it, and I can't wait to see what we do next time.
Yeah. All right. We'll see you.
See you guys.